as a consultant, as a practitioner, as a software leader, and now, actually managing a team of analytics professionals at Reliant Funding, is that the perfect analytics playbook is the true blending of people, process, and technology. And essentially what we're going to walk through today is, how do you take your analytics strategy and your analytics center of excellence, and how do we put structure around that? And more importantly, how do we take that structure and use tools that I'm going to provide to you to measure the existence of your analytics strategy and kind of the key components? And then how do we communicate the progress and execution of that strategy? And that's really the key behind the playbook. So what I'll talk about today is the key components of the playbook, the communication mechanisms of those components. So some of the real world challenges that you'll face and that you're already facing every day, and the visual communication and tools that I use alongside of the playbook, so that you ultimately can advance your organization from where it is today to where you want it to go. Now, my own journey, as I mentioned, started in the world of implementation or practitioner of analytics. Now, I believe that my skill, and one of the most important skills whether you're a practitioner, someone who's developing BI and analytics, or you're managing a team, as I opened, as the bridge between the people, process, and technology. So when we talk about analytics playbooks today, I do so with one important thing in mind, right? And that is that we all want to be data-driven. Now, interestingly enough, as I prepared for this keynote, and I prepared to talk about the concept of being data-driven versus data influenced, I was watching this Netflix special. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's called The Social Dilemma. And the social dilemma is all about what happens when you take massive, massive amounts of data. And if you're solving for things like attention and monetizing that attention and influence, right? If you're solving and you're using data for influence and attention, what are the downfall, or what is the downfall, or what are the negative impacts of using data and analytics and solving for, in this case, attention? And what was profound for me as I said, as an analytics practitioner, and as I'm coming in to talk about how do we use data to drive a full spectrum of influence, right? From true data driven, where literally the data is automating or driving the decision or action, to data influence, where I'm using a little bit of data to help make a decision. What happens at scale when these companies like Facebook and Google amass so much information, so much data, that with a bad actor or someone who's trying to use that influence potentially not for good, the whole premise behind Social Dilemma is what happens, right? And what does happen, without spoiling it, is you actually start reprogramming the user. Now, I know we're all here because as professionals, whether we're in the world of risk management or human capital management or asset management, our goal is really to influence change. We're all here to influence good, and we're here to influence the micro decisions that make our respective organizations better, right? So we're all here with good intent. But what was really interesting for me watching this, because I do everything I do with good intent, is that even as professionals, if you arm people even with the right data, we all know that data can be used for bad. It could be used to influence decisions that may not be right. So it actually, watching this movie had a profound effect on me. Also because, for those of you who are not familiar with Edward Tufte, he's the author of the quantitative display of the visual display of quantitative information, sorry. Um, that was literally the book that changed my career trajectory, especially as a data geek. And so during the movie, this quote pops up. And I had never even really thought about this, that in software and even in the world of BI and analytics, we do think of our customers and often refer to our customers as users, right? They're consumers or users of information. Now, the context of this quote is obviously specific to the social media companies and the way that they design their technologies and tools to be addictive. But I think from my perspective, right, if we're painting the picture of doing good, right, of using the data to influence good decisions, if I had my entire executive team and my frontline uh, consumers of information literally addicted to the information that I'm providing them about what's happening day to day. In my case, and hopefully in your case, that would be an incredible outcome to where they're addicted to good, fast, correct information to take action. So that kind of frames this concept of, or one of the key concepts of the playbook, and that is that we're all here to uh, implement an analytics strategy or be a cog in the analytics strategy that helps influence decisions. So, in my particular case, when I entered my current role at Reliant Funding, um, it was after a 10-year span of running a boutique analytics software company focused on geospatial analytics. So that's really where I had the opportunity to work with many state, federal, and local government agencies. Obviously, because many of you and your respective organizations make heavy use of geospatial data. And so coming into my current role, I actually didn't come in as VP of analytics or director of analytics. I needed a break. So I really wanted to go into a place where I would be armed with this playbook that I'm going to share, or that I'm sharing with you today, and a desire to take the company on a journey from where they were at to a desired outcome in a fairly short period of time. So the first thing I had to do, because the executive team talked to me, oh, we're data driven, everything we use, uses data. Every decision is scrutinized using data and analytics. The reality is, once you lift up the hood, um, when we have that conversation, the first kind of uncomfortable conversation I have is that, one, you're not as data driven as you think, but I have to explain why, right? So the way that I look at being data driven or data influence is really based on a spectrum, right? And that spectrum is based in many cases on the availability, the quality, and the accuracy of the data that you're using. And many of us know that, especially in the last 10 years, there's been tremendous innovation, right? I don't discount innovation and technology and maturity of kind of the analytics ecosystem to make BI and analytics easier and faster to produce, regardless of the data volume or regardless of the data quality. But as we all very well know, no matter what shiny tool pops up in the marketplace, it always comes back to data governance. And that conversation, data governance is not something that's very sexy, right? To have a discussion and say, hey, the level of influence that data has on our decisions is significantly less than what we actually think. And there's a huge gap for us to bridge. And as we know, and as I've kind of already explained, data governance is still one of the key components to your overarching analytics strategy. So I use this chart right here. I say, you know what? As we go down this spectrum, if you look at the x-axis, as we go through this spectrum, and as the data accuracy and consistency increases, and if we're doing our job right as I'm assuming we're doing our jobs correctly as analytics professionals for a moment. If we're doing our jobs and we invest in data governance, what happens over time is the comfort, confidence, and trust in the data increases. And at some point, you reach this inflection point where once the consistency, once the accuracy is there, the data and trust really explodes to the point where you then can start embarking on various predictive analytics, machine learning, AI, all of these really cool, incredible use cases, right, that I open with. Uh, you can start to approach and really build out your predictive capabilities once the data that you have is at a point where it's consistent, accurate, and available. And so I use this particular chart with our board, with the executive team, to really ask for the right resources, having the right people, the right technology, and the right rigor and process in place, and make data governance, in my case currently, a thing. Now, for many of you, you may already have strong data governance, but this is really for those of you in the audience who are always battling or fighting the fight of putting data governance at a higher emphasis for those who may not understand it. Um, so the reason that and one more point on this, the other reason I use this chart, I pull this chart out for every single business leader who comes to me and says, hey, when are we doing AI? Right? When are we going to kick off a machine learning project? And my answer is always twofold. Unless if we have the scale, meaning the volume of data needed to bypass some of the data quality, consistency, issues, I pull out this chart, and this is the chart I use to say, we're here on this spectrum. We need to be here. So hopefully this could be a potential tool that you use as you're trying to explain to stakeholders what role or where are we on the spectrum of influence. So the second area that I discuss, and a key component of your analytics strategy and playbook, is this notion that we're building a system of trust. And once again, this is a visual communication tool that I use because building a system of trust doesn't really mean anything to anyone. So if I'm having to explain and fight for resources, the two systems of trust that I always use as my examples, one is something tangible, right? Weather data. So depending on the agency, like geospatial data, if it comes to emergency response, if it comes to asset allocation, weather and geography play a huge role, specifically in emergency response. But I always explain, hey, a system of trust is something that you don't have to think twice about where the information comes from, right? If I look at the weather now, I'm in San Diego, so I admit I don't look at the weather app very often because it's 70 something all the time. But in other parts of the country, you look at the weather app, you go outside, and you have immediate validation and confirmation of the data that you're seeing. Now, if it were only that easy, right, for all of the data that we're using and curating, but another system of trust or data set of trust is things like demographic data. So this is a more relatable example of a system of trust where you survey, right? You collect massive volumes of data, in this case at scale. You ingest it, you process it, you profile it, you curate it, you validate it to the best of your ability, and then you let it go, right? And you let anyone and everyone, in this particular case, leverage the data to make profound decisions. And so as I explained systems of trust and what we're trying to do internally, I use these two as my examples and use case. So the next part or key part of the playbook that I found that I have to, I'll say fight for, but realign is probably a more correct statement, is the notion of goal setting and definition of goals, objectives, and in this case, KPIs. So obviously, I'm in the right place, right, with the Performance Institute and Government Performance Summit. So there's plenty of expertise here with me around KPI development, metric setting, and measuring against those KPIs. But all of these 5 areas, I don't need to read the bullets for you, for those of you who are watching. These are common issues that exist everywhere. I've yet to walk into an organization in my consulting days and say, hey, give me your KPI and metric dictionary, and someone walk over and hand it to me, and then be able to say, yeah, we're confident we can roll through this list, they've been signed off, we're ready to go. Often I go in and I find that I have 3 definitions of the same metric. I get the document, they say, here's the document, but so it, the whole thing about performance management, KPIs, setting and aligning goals is they should be evolving and ever changing. It should never be static. So the but is okay as long as the but is this one has 4 versions. We're not quite sure on this one. We have this definition, but we don't yet have the data, so on and so forth. And I use the Mars Climate Orbiter, sorry, as kind of my uh, extreme example of what happens when you have inconsistent metrics. 125 million out the door because one group was using the metric system and one was not, right? I see mistakes like this all the time. And I have seen other mistakes, not necessarily metrics, but certainly measurements that have cost tens of millions of dollars. So I think having a framework in place for properly designing and setting goals and defining KPIs is absolutely critical. So it always boils down to, when I have the discussion, where are we going? So the objective, where are we right now? How do we measure? Where are we at this very moment? Right. So regardless of what KPI or goal framework, I named a couple: WIG, SMART. I use one called BIDF. How did we get here? Right. So we know where we're at. How did we arrive? So various descriptive analytics. This is really the BI. And then what do we do next? Right. So having a plan for every KPI of where are we going, where are we, how do we get here, and what do we do next? That's where data analysis, that's where the predictive comes into place. And so this kind of framework and having the business discussion around goal setting and objectives, and ensuring that you're setting goals properly, right? Where are we, what are we doing, by how much, and by when, is really how you set the goal setting foundation of the playbook. So the last part of the playbook, which is really, and I'll show you the actual template, the Analytics Competency Center, Center of Excellence. I know they're 2 kind of different things, but the 2 terms are used and interchanged often. So I'll throw them both out there. But really, the set of standards, practices, technology, all of the stuff that you use, as I opened, to align people, process, and technology. What is this competency? And similar to that chart that that I opened with, that talked around data governance, where you have this spectrum of influence, right? For us, we've all, as analytics professionals, for those of you who have been around, we've all been on this journey. From a technology and a marketplace perspective, in our own respective organizations, we're all on this journey. And this is the medium that I usually leverage to explain to my stakeholders what this journey will look like. Because, as I mentioned and alluded to a moment ago, very often the question that I get from various business leaders is, we're embarking on this predictive scenario. We want to build models. We want to create scores. I want to leverage the data beyond just showing me where are we and how do we get here, I want to start predicting what's going to happen next, right? That's where I use that chart. And so as at least for me, I found that this kind of visual medium to explain the different types of analytics and how you have to crawl, walk, and you have to crawl before you walk. This is how I explain the spectrum of influence that I opened with when it comes to data and what you need to actually implement to reach that data-driven state. And for most of us, that data-driven state is in the middle, right, around predictive, not necessarily prescriptive. I think desired state and euphoria would be prescriptive, but the reality is predictive for most of us. So when we talk about, and I'm going to jump into the specifics of the playbook now, or how we structure the playbook around these concepts, this is how I communicate what is really a very long, tense document into something that's very simple and easy to digest. So I keep talking about a playbook. What is the playbook? What is this tangible asset that we create and we distribute? So the playbook has two components. And I literally took a screenshot off of our Confluence page. So Confluence is like a SharePoint or a WordPress. It's just a web page that holds multiple pages of content. So the blueprint is really a organized, structured document that keeps all facets of your analytics strategy in a organized, structured format. And so there's five. I alluded to the playbook discussing the key components as it relates to explaining the strategy and the key areas where I have experienced that I need to communicate, over communicate, or fight for resources. But the playbook itself is focused on objectives and personas, right? What are you doing and who are you serving? Priorities and outcomes, right? So there's a million problems that you could be solving as an analytics organization, right? What are the specific priorities of the analytics team? What specific problems are you solving? Number three, what investments do we need to make? What is the ROI on those investments? Number four is the data and the technology, right? What is our application architecture? What is what are the information categories? What does the data look like? What are our common taxonomies that we use? And then finally, the glue that holds it all together, which is the process and the execution, right? What is my COE? What does my data governance look like? What are my KPIs and metrics? What's the framework that we use? How are we educating and training our people? What does support look like? All of these things that we're all talking about and all working on in parallel. This document puts all of that together in one structured format. So the benefit of that, and the reason why I do that, is that my executive team gets to the third page and then they check out. This thing is super dense. It's very long. It's very involved to create and manage. However, every time I onboard a new vendor, every time I onboard a new consultant, so anyone whose role is to take, curate, and distribute data on the analytics team or as an embedded analyst, gets this playbook and they read it top down. Because what this playbook is an explanation of how in my case, of how the organization runs, right? But it is an analytics centric lens on how the business runs. And the reality is, if you really want to be a data-driven organization, you have to be able to communicate how the business runs through the lens of the people who are using data and to, as I showed before, curate, organize, and distribute that data as information. And so the feedback from having this kind of document where you can look at it top down, right? This is a visual of the first page that you're looking at on the screen, right? This is how I explain to my board and my executive team why the analytics team exists. To be able to look at it top down like that, but then go all the way into the weeds on governance and KPIs and to understand how you do it is really the plan, the secret sauce of getting from the point where I started at in my organization, uh, as I mentioned in my opening, to just coming in as a data worker to being VP of analytics in a year and a half, right? Having a plan, having a blueprint, and having a way to communicate the success of that blueprint is the secret sauce. And so when I talk about how do we take this dense, long, structured document that no executive is ever going to read past the first page or second page, how do I explain and communicate where we are in this journey? And I'll flip back actually. If you look down the right side, you see all of the categories for the analytics playbook. What I do is I organize all of those categories in a radar chart. And this chart becomes the way that I use data to explain and communicate progress. So what we're looking at here on this radar chart, you see all of the categories going in a circle. The goal is to create a perfect circle, right? So once all of the nodes on that chart reach the outer rim of the radar, mission accomplished. We are highly successful. So there's two bands on the chart. So the first band, which is the orange one, is step one, right? And that is documenting and starting to create the analytics playbook. And what we're doing is we're measuring the existence for each one of these areas, right? So I mentioned data governance. I mentioned KPIs and goal setting. I mentioned influence, using data to influence decisions. These are the areas that I find that organizations typically struggle, or that are holding the organizations back from taking the next step. So when I came in, there were minor areas in the playbook where we were deficient. You can see on the left-hand side that education and training wasn't where it was supposed to be. Some of the architecture standards were not well defined or set in stone, right? These are the areas that you can communicate using this visual that you're going to improve on over time. So once you get to the point where you've identified all the areas and you can start measuring them, the green area is where you start measuring your execution. So if you have a plan and you have a well-defined plan, in parallel, you're obviously either mid-step or beginning to execute to improve and reach the goals that you set for every part of this plan. Now, for those of you that have a very mature analytics strategy and your years or decades, hopefully not decades because things change so quickly, right? But if you do find yourself in the position where you've got a really mature analytics competency, you're wildly successful, there's a third band that I normally don't include, which is where you start measuring the impact. Now, the way that I get to these numbers, one is using surveys. So I'll do a survey every quarter where an area where there's a weakness, I'll survey stakeholders or people who are involved in the organization, who are exposed to one of the nodes in this radar chart. And we ask them from 1 to 5, how are we doing? And we leverage that data to influence and try to put a correct score, right? There's subjectivity, obviously, but nonetheless, you're at least putting yourself in a position where you're actually measuring your success. So really important to note, these two documents, the actual playbook themselves, I have templates. So there's an Excel spreadsheet that generates this visual, and I have a Word document that's a template for this particular playbook that we will make available to you. I don't have the information right now how we will distribute, but I do know it was communicated to me. I've provided the materials that through the conference, you'll have the ability to get to these documents and be able to explore and kick it around, and by all means, ask any questions that you may have. So we talked about the key components or key cogs of the analytics playbook and some of the visual communication mediums I use to explain to your non-analytics professionals, leaders, as you are fighting for resources, people, additional things to make you successful. It goes without saying that part of communicating that success and part of relaying and taking the next step in it and executing on the analytics playbook is rubber meeting road and putting data to work. So one of the key areas that I found over the last few years is, and to bring it back even to the social dilemma, is that anything that can be measured will be. And as we all know, the volume of data that we produce as a society, as organizations, uh, is ever exploding, right? The fact that, you know, all of the world's, as I open all the world's data, um, and, you know, we've doubled all the world's data in the last 2 years, right? And as we see, the availability of public data is also incredible. I know through COVID, right, we've seen firsthand what happens when we take data, right, in this case, a lot of the COVID data, the cases data, and we make that data readily available globally. The volume of insights and intelligence, because we're all chasing after a similar problem, and that is one, prevention of spreading, uh, to track and understand where the hotspots are, and ultimately, as a society, we are trying to protect ourselves the best that we can with what resources we all have. So putting data to work, leveraging data, and then relaying how you're doing that back to stakeholders, as I found, is one of the key areas to kind of advance your ability to get the resources you need for your playbook. The other component and uh, area that is absolutely critical to your success for delivering not just a playbook, but actually executing on that playbook is clear prioritization of problems and impact. I find myself in the position as an analytics leader, and maybe you do too, that you may have incredible resources, meaning people, human capital, to solve many, many different problems. But the challenge that I find myself in is this continuous push and pull of like, hey, what problems should we be solving? And and how do I prioritize all of these problems? Because I have different stakeholders who have different needs, and I may not fully understand uh, the problems that arrive at my team's desk. So one of the key points of the playbook that I communicate is this tool that I use for one, identifying problems using two measurements. One is trying to rank 1 through 5, or scoring 1 through 5. What is the business criticality of this problem? Whether we're using dollars or people at risk or whatever the measurement is, what I'm trying to do is create a consistent measurement of business criticality from 1 to 5. So in this particular example, I've organized real problems, right, that all of us are facing, right? Evidence-based policymaking, some of the challenge with creating external transparency, lack of integrated public sector data, real-time public and risk and security. These are real world challenges that many of you are facing today in your respective organizations. If I'm responsible for solving or building analytics to address or help advance us in all four of these business, or all three, four of these areas, how do I organize those and communicate them? So once again, goes back to what is the degree of business criticality, or what is the level of pain? Number two is, what is the impact if we use data to address this particular business challenge? So in this helps from a prioritization and communication standpoint, when we're trying to match up business challenges or projects or initiatives that don't necessarily come from the same group or maybe malaligned in how you're measuring. This kind of tool where you have high impact, high criticality, uh, well, that's critical. That's P1. Low impact, low pain, that's our backlog. So this is another component of the analytics playbook, because ultimately what I end up with is one, a starting point of inventorying all the business problems, right? What are we know, right? At the beginning of the year, we set key organizational objectives, right? And goals. And for lines of business or groups, every group has their own goal. So let's take all of those goals, let's put them on paper, and let's actually rank them using criticality and impact, right? Because those are two things that are absolutely universal. You may not agree on the measurement, right? That may be a point of debate, but at least now you've got a way to measure all these things, put them on paper, and now you have a time-stamped measurement of all the initiatives, so that when you go back, and I'll go back 2 slides, and you show off how you've put data to work, you're able to point to that specific business aligned challenge and where it fit on the respective business criticality impact scale. So that, in essence, is how we have taken the strategy and kind of aligned it to the execution. So I have two more components to discuss that go into the playbook. One is roadmap, right? So I've alluded on multiple occasions during this keynote that we'll often have, I'll have leaders come in and we'll do a lunch and learn, and we'll be talking around what's next, right? What are some of the cool things that we've seen? I read something on LinkedIn. How can we implement this cool new machine learning technology? I have another leader who's being marketed to by a vendor who's telling them that they can solve all the world's problems if we just use their technology. I talked about open data a little bit, big data analytics, right? That is a real thing, right? That curve that we looked at earlier, in the case where you do have data at scale, you have a massive volume of information, you can go into some incredible big data analytics initiatives. So part of building the playbook is to identify these areas and to spell them out. What is the roadmap to get to these key trends, right? What is it going to take for us to embark on a machine learning or AI initiative? What are we doing with open data? How are we improving our ability to tell stories with data? Which, as a data visualization junkie, is very near and dear to my heart. If you're asked by any leader, what is our plan, to be able, one, to have something on paper, but to say, here's our plan on these areas. And oh yeah, that's component 5.3 on, and I don't know the number, so luckily no one's looking at the template, but that's point 5.3 on our analytics playbook. That's a very powerful tool in your arsenal when you're having these discussions. So really, to kind of close it out, as I opened, it always boils back to this blend, as an analytics professional, blending people, process, and technology. Because data is just data. Data is kind of like the unrefined gold that we all have at our disposal. There's tons of it. And what makes a successful analytics playbook execution or an analytics organization is how you take the people in your organization. I always start people first, right? How do you invest in the people that you have? I know that I opened with Facebook and Google and the social dilemma when we take all of this data at scale and we use that to influence decision. Well, what if you're not Facebook and Google and you may have incredible people, but you don't have the best and brightest data scientists with unlimited resources and unlimited data? How do we invest in our people to get the most out of them. From a process perspective, um, having the analytics team and the analytics playbook aligned to the underlying process and the life cycle of the full life cycle of data. Um, I open with data governance. I will close with data governance. But how do we ensure that the data that we collect internally, our internal data, how do we ensure that we are properly managing that along with the process to ensure it's not a garbage in, garbage out scenario? And then finally, from a technology perspective, do we have the right tools, right? I think from an analytics perspective now, uh, there's parity between a lot of the tools and technologies out there. Um, but there are technologies that are head and shoulders above competition. So I'm not here to relay or endorse any specific technology. But what I would say is, and this is part of what I present to my leaders and board, is that we're going to experiment. We're going to try technology that will not work, right? We'll be really excited about it. We're going to spend some money. We're going to create. We're going to give it a go. But if it doesn't work, we're going to cut bait really, really fast because we're going to have very clear objectives. We're going to measure against those objectives. And if we're not getting there, we're not going to, we are going to figure out how to fail. We're going to do everything in our power to not fail. But if you're not experimenting and you're not learning, one, it goes back up to the top of the pyramid for the people, because I can tell you right now, uh, the best way to retain and get people excited uh, is new tools to learn, to be up to date on new technology. So the technology, though we haven't really talked about it, is a key cog in not only how do you entice and get people excited, but also how you advance your analytic strategy. So with that, I will wrap up with another quote from someone, another highly respected individual in the world of performance management analytics, and even amongst BI professionals, Peter Drucker. Unless commitment is made, there's only promises and hopes, but no plans. Hopefully, as you continue on your own journeys, and as you engage and work together and network, uh, hopefully this presentation and the materials, if there's a couple of nuggets of knowledge, if there's a couple tools, if there's a couple approaches to explain things that you can use, I really do hope that as you plan out and execute on your own strategies, that you have the same kind of success that I've had. And with that, I thank you and hope to hear from you. And by all means, feel free to reach out anytime for any questions related to the analytic playbook tools. Thank you again. Enjoy the conference and have a wonderful day.